Welcome to the Outlier podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Conlin, and we have something special for you all today. You guys remember last month, the month of May, I had Jarrett Ferentino. Jarrett, say hello.
Hello.
Okay, so he's more than just a pretty face, you guys. He's a former homicide prosecutor, 30 years. He's a practicing trial attorney now. You can see him on the CW Crime Nation. And what Jarrett and I are doing is, as you can see, there's a little title right there, and it says Primetime Crime. So we're going to start this as a series on the Outlier, and then we're going to roll it out into a show. So email me, email Jarrett. I'll have our info in the episode notes. You can tell us what you want to hear and any cases that you want us to cover. So first things first, how are you? I haven't seen you in a month. So
well, it's been a month to the day, I think. Too.
Really?
Isn't that cool? Yeah. So it's listen. Anytime I get the chance to come out to New York City, it's great. I'm well. I'm like 2 months past retirement from the DA's office, so I'm feeling pretty good.
Wow. Well, we missed you at CrimeCon. You didn't come, and I begged Jarrett to come, and it was such an amazing time. And next year we have to go.
Next year, absolutely. Center stage next year.
I mean, I hope so. I made a lot of new friends. There was just quickly this lady in line. She was very kind, but I was telling her I was about to turn 40 this summer in a few months. And she said, I thought it was going to be words of wisdom and she was going to give me just some encouragement. And she said, well, I just want to let you know that my doctor told me the day that I turn 40, my boobs are going to drop and my eyesight is going to start to go. Yeah. And I was waiting for her to say, no, that wasn't the case. And she said, no, that literally happened the day I turned 40. So I was like, thank you so much. Please go away. So yeah, that was a thing. That was a thing.
You never know what you're going to learn with the CrimeCon people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But listen, let's start right away because I'm a little bit sick of talking about Karen Read. I feel like I've been talking about it ad nauseum. Like 3 different times this week at CrimeCon. Everyone was talking about it, but I just want to get specific at this point.
Sure.
So it's Thursday, June 6th, and there was a half day today. There's no court tomorrow. This podcast is going to air tomorrow. But what everyone is talking about is if Trooper Michael Proctor is going to take the stand. And so what we saw this morning was Bukaki, Trooper, no, I'm just kidding. That's what one of the witnesses called him. No, Buchanan, he took the stand. And I believe the prosecution was kind of making him out to be the lead investigator because they have it pretty much determined in their head that they're not going to put Trooper Proctor on the stand, which that's not necessarily a given yet. This is just my interpretation. And some of the stuff he was saying, I was like, no way. You need Trooper Proctor. You need the lead investigator.
So Trooper Proctor is, in my world, the affiant of the case. So he would have been the one who swore on the affidavit of probable cause in support of the charges for Karen Read. My style is I would save that witness until the end of my case in chief. Here's why. Number one, because if anything was left out during the trial, it would be Proctor who can run the whole panoply of the case. So he can tie up any loose ends. You don't want to call him too early because he's subject to cross on things maybe the jury hasn't heard yet. So you don't want to put your affiant on prematurely, but at the same time, if this particular situation this is a strategy they're considering because Proctor has his own problems. Proctor is under a veil of suspicion right now. Mm-hmm. He's under investigation for his handling of this case. He has his own lawyers with him now. When your affiant shows up to your trial with their own lawyer, you got problems.
Yeah.
And so this question of, it's tough enough to decide when to call a Proctor in that case, when to call this person to the stand. Now you have this person with all this baggage on this very case. You can't look like you're hiding him, but if you are concerned, do you make the strategic decision not to call him? It could be a game time decision. They could look at everything that's come in thus far. What do we need Proctor to get in? What have we given the jury at this point? And they've called a lot of people. But it's very difficult to tell that story without him. So it's concerning. This is not good news for the prosecution at all.
No, but do you think there's a world where the defense calls him and not the prosecution?
Well, certainly they have a right to. I've had cases where my affiants were recalled by the defense, let's say, if they felt like there was a matzo ball out there that somebody didn't get into. They can. And also a strategic call on their part. However, they don't have to, okay? Their obligation is to prove nothing. The prosecution has to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. If they don't meet their burden, it's not on the defense to call Proctor and fill in any gaps, okay? One of the other things that you and I have talked about, what is the style of questioning of Proctor? If the defense calls him, they really can't lead him. He's one of their witnesses. So people should know, if you call a witness, you cannot put words in their mouth. You're not cross-examining your own witness unless that witness goes south. And then you ask the court, and we've all seen this, permission to treat this person as a hostile witness, Your Honor. That means you can't beat Proctor up. You would cross-examine him and ask him leading questions like, isn't it true, Mr. Proctor, you planted the red lighting from the rear of the car, those kind of things. You can't do that if you call him on your own. If you do, it's objectionable, and that table has to be
interesting.
set.
I just don't see the judge ever allowing the defense to, if they call him, to treat him as a hostile witness.
Well,
because
it plays out in front of the judge. Like you only get there. You don't call him and ask immediately, typically, to treat him hostile. You can, but the judge would give them a little leeway and see how it goes. Here's the problem with Proctor. He's under investigation.
Yeah.
Anything he says in response to either prosecution or defense questions can be used against him. He's literally in the hot seat, whether he gets called to the witness stand or not. He then would have the option to take the Fifth Amendment. That's something that would happen out of the auspices of the jury.
That would be horrible, right?
Could you imagine
horrible.
a case where your affiant is taking the Fifth Amendment?
Well, and a police officer, right? I mean, that would be so bad, I feel like, for police everywhere to have a lead investigator on the stand take the Fifth Amendment.
So what does it look like? What does it look like to a juror? He's hiding something.
Exactly.
Right? Whether or not he's exercising his constitutional right, he's doing what's in his best interests. This is the prosecution of Karen Reed. What does it mean for them? The affiant is hiding something. And that wouldn't necessarily play out in front of the jury either. That discussion first happens in front of the judge. I've had it where it gets to be an issue you're dealing with in trial. Not pretty in front of a jury, I could tell you that.
Yeah. And this morning and yesterday, I mean, my head is spinning with all the pieces of the taillight and the timeline, because obviously knowing what I know, knowing both sides and how one side is claiming that the taillight was planted after the fact, and then the other side is saying, nope, this is how it happened. It's tough. And I have to think that the jury, they don't know all these nuances that I know. I mean, they can see what Alan Jackson is trying to do with his questioning, which I thought was brilliant, by the way, with all these timestamps being wrong. And there's also something, there's a video that they took at the Sally Port where the car is, but it's flip-flopped. It's reversed. And they never said this yesterday. Lally never brought this up, and Buchanan never brought this up. And then today, Alan Jackson said that, and I was like, oh, wouldn't that be important to know?
I would think so.
So
none of this stuff. So, and I had said last time we talked about Reed, the simplest explanation is often the truth,
was you.
Right?
Yeah.
Then you said that quote later, didn't you?
I
didn't give me credit for it. But the point of it is, when you spend your time addressing the defense's theory instead of basically proving yours, you're falling into their trap. And I don't like the way this is playing out necessarily from a prosecution standpoint. Maybe the jury can say, hey, look, I see through all of this. I see what they're trying to do with, painting everybody in this bad light. And Karen Reed is just the victim of circumstance and this conspiracy. However, when you spend your time kind of shutting down what the defense is suggesting, this whiff of a conspiracy, it's confusing. And I told you, confusing is never helpful to the prosecution.
Yeah, definitely. And the judge stated this morning that she believes the trial should be over by the end of July, if I heard correctly. And I guess that makes sense since they take so many days off and the prosecution has 30 witnesses left. So, yeah.
But remember one thing. We're already poking holes is something you say, right? Mm-hmm. We're already there. The defense hasn't even started yet. These aren't their experts. These aren't this is the prosecution's experts. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a hot mess.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And it's shaping up to be. Now, look, I like to think a jury's going to, it's not even their job to give you the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. It's like, what have you proven? And it's become a sideshow. So we'll see.
I do feel so bad for the O'Keefe family. And his mom just cries in court. It's so sad. It's
awful. But the reality is, the longer this takes, the further down the rabbit hole of the conspiracy theories we go, the more complicated and harder it gets for the jury to make the decision on that simplest version of facts. Yeah. That's how I see it.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree with you there. And I saw on the defense witness list, they're calling John O'Keefe's father. And I wonder why. I kind of tried to dig in to see if Karen Reed had a relationship with him, but I feel bad for the family members called to the stand about this. I mean.
Last thing I think about the Reed case, I think the murder charge is an overreach. You would have to say, she intended to run him over in that manner, take off, and let him die in the front yard that way. That was her intention. I don't see it. I don't see it based on every case I have has nasty texts.
Yeah.
And people say, when I'm arguing with my significant other, I say nasty things. And I often say to people like, well, yeah, but your significant other doesn't end up dead.
Right.
So they're relevant. But I think this charge is an overreach.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I hate saying it's my opinion that this was retaliation of some sort. And her saying, well, wait a minute. No, I didn't do this. I absolutely didn't do this. I'm not going to take this manslaughter plea or whatever.
Right.
I have a third party defense and this is what it is. And then they pulled these texts and these voicemails and they had Laura Sullivan up on the stand being like, Karen paid for dinner the first night in Aruba. And you're like, oh, so she's murdery. That's when she literally got super murdery and was like, let me start. Yeah. So stupid. I totally agree with you. Overreaching.
So that on their own, I think they're going down on that charge. So this is a fight for manslaughter. In my opinion. But I always tell people when I say, in my opinion, I have done the research and I happen to have done this for a long time. I always tell people whenever they want to fight with me about a case, now what line of work are you in? You're in real estate? Yeah, you're an expert in that field, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that would be me though. That would be me. This is my opinion that I pull out of my ass.
Listen, it's not that complicated and I'm often wrong. So let's say that right out the gate. It's amazing to me how many people who have really nothing to do with the line of work of prosecution, defense are so informed and so up on the law and up on these cases that they'd run circles around some of the people I've worked with. So,
well, that's funny. I read an article, I think it was in the New York Times, about the Serial podcast and about how that podcast made regular people believe that they are these legal experts now, that they are these, judicial experts. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting because you do see a lot of people that feel like they know a lot about the law. And you're like, oh, wow. Again, what do you do?
Well, that's why we call it the practice of law because we're just practicing anyway. So why shouldn't everybody get a shot? Right?
Okay, I like that. Well, let's pivot then just very quickly. This is not super high profile, but it is being aired across Law and Crime and Court TV, the Karen Swift trial.
Yes.
Her husband, David Swift, is on trial for her murder. They just finished, I think the jury is deliberating right now, actually, or as of yesterday.
Right.
And this was a tough one as well because the state came out saying, well, look, we don't have a lot of evidence here. There's really no DNA evidence.
Circumstantial. There's no physical evidence.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. Circumstantial is all they have. And let me be clear, they charged him 11 years after her death. And in my opinion, he probably did it, but I don't think they have enough to prove there at all. Their defense was that he was on crutches, he hurt his leg, therefore he could not have dragged his wife out of bed into the garage and beat her so viciously that I don't know the exact medical termination, but her brain split apart. I don't know what that's called, but it was bad, very bad.
Well, and it's that often is indicative of rage and a very personal crime. So in a sense, the nature of her death could inure back to him. But the other thing about the case is time doesn't make your case better necessarily. So when you have a case that's 11 years old, now I've won cases and have had successful prosecutions of purely circumstantial cases. When people say, yes, but it's circumstantial evidence, I say, well, yeah, that's still evidence. And there's a lot of circumstance here, right? Like he was pissed at her. He was extremely jealous. He was constantly showing up when she was out in rage. And she was living a lifestyle that was not indicative of a mom raising kids, which is where he wanted her to be. So, look, the circumstances are really ripe for him to have done this. But like you said, everyone now is so tuned up and ready to hear DNA, something. That's not going to be helpful for the prosecution. However, I don't know. I'm kind of 50-50 with this case. I was looking into this case, and there's always these characters that show up, though. Did you watch anything like their neighbor? Every case I've ever had, I always have to pick like employee of the month. Like I always pick like witness of the case. Right? Hog Shooter is the neighbor of the Swifts. And he claimed he smelled a chemical the day Karen went missing, right? Here's the thing. He was later in trouble, as I understand, for poisoning dogs in the neighborhood.
You're correct.
First of all, sometimes I think we live in a simulation, right? This guy was set up. His name is Hog Shooter. Right? And he's smelling chemicals. At the same time, he's poisoning dogs in the neighborhood. Like whenever you pull the curtain back on these neighborhoods of these murders, and this isn't like a gang-ridden neighborhood. This is suburbia. You find guys like Hog Shooter who come in, show up, and he's poisoning dogs. It's like,
listen, you said no perfect witnesses. Okay?
Well, and there's no perfect witnesses, and then guys like this show up. Like you could have like a surreal life of like witnesses in my cases in the past. So I see Hog Shooter, I'm like, this is great. Like these are the kind of things that are just so real when you start doing a deep dive and an investigation into a neighborhood. I don't know where this case is going to go. It has all the feel that he did this. But like you said, that's it. He probably did it. That ain't enough. Like this is not, you want to gamble, I always tell people, go to Bally's, go to Mohegan Sun. This ain't where we gamble. Probably ain't good enough.
Right.
It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's a hell of a burden.
Yeah. And I thought, the testimony from his daughter and his son, I mean, it's very clear. They love their dad. Their dad is the only person they've known for the last 4 years in raising them. And yeah, it was weird to me also that nobody heard anything. I don't know how people sleep. I'm a very light sleeper. I would think if somebody was being bludgeoned to death in my basement and I looked at the house and the square footage and I'm like, okay, you probably could have heard something.
Right.
They didn't hear anything.
Well, that was, he could have knocked her out quick. That's something. And the other thing was there was some phone. Every case comes down to phones too nowadays too. So there was some phone technology that took the phone out to where she was found and then back to the house, which is that's a pretty big piece of, I wouldn't say, that's kind of somewhere in between circumstantial and physical evidence. Okay. That's a hell of a circumstance. If you look at that, I always say like there's this third area now, tech evidence. Okay.
Yeah.
And when you have that, and I guess I know there's two sides to this argument, but the fact that the car was driven on a flat tire at some point as well. So there's a lot here. It's hard to kind of figure out where they're going to come down, but it's an intriguing case. Yeah.
And just to clarify on that one, I think that the range, I think her cell phone last pinged from the house at like 4:38.
Yes.
But the defense was saying, oh no, it pinged out at 5 a.m. or whatever. And just so everyone knows, if you're not familiar with this case, Karen Swift was a Tennessee housewife, her and her husband. They had lots of issues, so many issues that her husband actually had an affair at one point, and a baby came out of that affair.
Got remarried and had similar issues down the road. Now I'm starting to think, does somebody know how to push your buttons, or do you have a lot of buttons?
I mean, right?
The problem?
Yeah. So the night Karen goes missing, she goes to a Halloween party with her friends. Her daughter calls her, says, pick me up from a sleepover. She picks her up. They go home, they go to bed. Next thing you know, Karen's missing. Her body winds up 2 miles away from her home in a graveyard, which also brings me back to Tennessee law enforcement. I have a whole podcast on Tennessee alleged corruption. Let me say alleged. There's a difference between corruption and lazy. And with this case, I don't know. I think it might be laziness, but yeah.
Well, there's the thing that, there's a lot of latitude between corrupt and stupid. and lazy. So I don't know. And again, that's not an indictment on, but this is where I found law enforcement to be tremendous, well-trained, hardworking. I found police officers in my career to be corrupt, and I found some to be really dumb. So, I mean, you fall into one of those categories, and who knows? On this one, like I said, the biggest issue here is time.
Yeah.
Time is and he was since remarried, and people move on with their lives. It's tough. It's tough to prove a case.
Then just sorry to interrupt you. His initial interview with police, and they played it on the first day of the trial, and when she was missing, I just cannot imagine this. Like, please kill me if my husband just talks all this shit about me when I'm missing, and he's telling police that, oh yeah, she likes to party, she gets home at 3 or 4 a.m. I'm like, please paint me in a better light than that, bro.
Well, that is deflection. See, he's re-victimizing her. He's playing a role there. He's saying he's basically putting the scent of badness, malevolence on her. Like, this isn't some innocent victim that's missing. This isn't some suburban mom. She's out drinking. She's a swinger. These are the things he said. And again, it's deflection. He wants to be painted in a better light and continue to victimize her. And that's a problem. That to me is, again, highly circumstantial. If my wife was missing, if your husband was missing, would you be taking a run at them, their personal character? No. You'd say, where the hell is my wife?
Yes.
And that's so. Look, again, that could be spun really badly for him.
Yes, and can I just say, just off topic, kind of, can we stop doing this to moms and to females in general? I am so sick of this. Like, even with Karen Reed. Yes, there's some cringy texts up there. And Karen Swift, yes, maybe she was a swinger. She liked to go out. So, like, Karen Swift deserves to be murdered and deserves to be dragged. And no, not at all.
Everybody does we do a good job of trying to simplify a case. Like, this is a mom. She's gone missing, and she had a loving family. Everybody's lives are complicated and multifaceted. And then the second you start shattering that image with, she was a partier, or she may have been like swinging with these people, which is a little extreme for some, I guess, that starts to paint her in a different, but again, like, this is a murder trial. Does that mean you're inviting being bludgeoned to death? No.
No, so, this is literally who murdered Karen Swift, not marry Karen Swift, right? It's not the dating game Karen Swift. And, like, I read a comment, which I shouldn't have done, about myself yesterday, and someone was like, Lauren Conlin's so emotional. I'm emotional. I think I talk just like you do, but I'm maybe more with my hands. No, you talk with your hands too. You're Italian. I'm just saying, females, we can't be passionate. We have to be emotional. Bitch, you'll know when I'm emotional. I will let you know when I'm emotional.
Well, when they tell us the same thing, take emotion out of what prosecutors do. I have led every case with my heart, and that's a blessing and a curse. I'm an emotional basket case when it comes to my victims, my police officers, my witnesses, because it's part of my caring. It's part of my investment. But I don't let my emotions get out of control. I let them motivate me. So if you're emotional, if you're too emotional, good. It's about time people start caring about things. It's cool for it's cool for kids.
You all hear that?
But it's true. Like, every kids, like, it's cool to not give a shit about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Care about something.
Yes, right? I agree.
I'm like, what? Is it wrong to give a shit about the job? This is important work, right?
Yeah.
So I love people. It's like, don't get too emotional. Don't get too caught up in this. I'm looking at a guy who was repeatedly stabbed to death in a convenience store by a guy who robbed him for $50.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's troubling me.
Yeah.
And it's going to trouble me right into that courtroom.
I don't mean to laugh. It's not funny. But yeah,
true.
You're right. Like, sorry
take
that
your
I
emotion out of it.
Yeah.
Then have AI prosecutors going forward. That's what I say then.
Oh my God, that would be ridiculous. Can you imagine?
They'd probably be better than some of the guys I've encountered. A lot better. But.
Wow. No, you make a really good point here, though. How can you do your job as a prosecutor without having a little bit of emotion?
Right. You can't.
Yeah.
Believe me, you're not doing it for the money. So, if you don't care, why are you doing it?
Yeah, right? Definitely. Okay, let's move into Kohberger world, because I am very ill-informed. So I need you to let me know what the hell is going on. What is taking so long? Why is everyone so upset?
Whenever we talk about Kohberger, I drop my voice like an octave. We get real serious. But
oh, okay.
There's so much going on. I think what people aren't getting. Okay, when you have a case that's this large, and I have not had a case that's as large as Koberger, I'm not pretending here, but I have had cases 30 and 40,000 pages of materials, okay? So here's what people ask me. They say, Jarrett, how can't they have the evidence? They arrested him. Okay, let's stop there. They have the evidence. However, evidence has to be tested. This is not a television show where that testing is completed in 45 minutes and then Mr. Koberger's convicted. It takes months and months and months. And that lab has all this data and information they have. So when the defense requests those items of the prosecution, they'll say, fine, Mr. DA, you tested all this DNA evidence. You tested the knife sheath. I want all of the history of this lab. I want any mistake they've ever made. Do you think that could be garnered in a day? It can't. So there's other evidence that's missing too, quote unquote missing. There's certain cellular information that takes time to get. Okay, so when they say...
But not this much time.
Well, it takes time. Some of it, now they had the lead detective on the stand, and he didn't have a lot of answers for where certain pieces of evidence are. So to finish my thought on why it takes so long, there is testing, processing, and requesting. That information comes physically into the district attorney's office. It's processed, okay? It's numbered. It's separated. Then an assistant on the case calls an assistant over at the public defender's office and says, hey, we got items 40,000 to 60,000 here. Come pick it up. Somebody has to it just takes time when you're dealing with this depth of a case. However, there's some other things going on here. When you have a case that's this big, they break the prosecution into teams. You have a tech team, you have a physical evidence team, you have a scene team, and it's not clear that communication is great between those teams. And the detective didn't have all the answers for where certain pieces of evidence are. In fact, his default answer was, if we had it, the DA now has it, okay? And that was generally what he was saying. So there are some issues when it comes to certain pieces of evidence, a little different than what I was just saying, that it seems like they're being referred to and have not been turned over. It's entirely possible, though, these files get so large, the defense is sitting on them and doesn't even realize they have them. I've had that happen, too. So,
can I ask you a dumb question? It could be dumb. I don't know. Let's see. So you've got DNA evidence and you have to ship it out. This is Idaho, obviously. I don't know. I've heard or I've read that, let's say, Kentucky takes the longest to process DNA evidence, but Connecticut is the quickest. Are you able to submit that evidence out to other states for a faster turnaround time?
Oh, yeah. So so if you're talking about Kentucky and Tennessee, you're probably talking about their state labs.
Yeah.
But you can use a third-party vendor like NMS Laboratories, some other companies that do it. I've had detectives physically transport pieces of evidence to a private lab and expedite it when you're up against the clock. But again, part of what we're talking about in the Koberger case is it's just such a large file at this point. You know, to even call it a file is a little bit of a misnomer. It's like, so to answer part of your question is there's some issues going on there, okay? Yeah. I don't know all of it. And believe me, they're holding a lot of this information close to the vest, okay? I follow the case. The other thing that's going on, you're saying, why is it taking so long? If the defense doesn't have this stuff, they can't digest it. They can't test it on their own. We can't go to trial. How can you put Brian Koberger on trial if he hasn't had a chance or even looked at the evidence? It's not trial by surprise or attack in this country.
Right,
I mean, you have the right not only to challenge the witnesses against you, you have the right, and the prosecution has the obligation to afford you the opportunity to review the evidence against you, test it yourself. The government could actually be forced to pay for that and basically fortify yourself against trial. That's what you have all those rights for. So this trial ain't happening anytime soon. And the longer these inquiries for where certain pieces of evidence are, whether or not they're out there yet, it is a longer road to trial here.
And I guess you're right, because I guess I wouldn't want this evidence being shipped across.
I'm right.
Yeah, okay, you're right. No, but I wouldn't want this evidence being shipped across multiple states and potentially being damaged or whatever it is.
There's secured ways to do. I mean, I would trust FedEx sooner than I would trust some of our detectives to drive it across the state. But
I mean,
there's ways, there's methods to securely and safely transport evidence. There is. I mean, they physically had to transport Mr. Kohlberger across the country from Pennsylvania back to Idaho. So, but again, anytime you do that, you're inviting potential problems.
Right. And just thinking about John O'Keefe, the sweatshirt he had on was apparently sitting in Trooper Proctor's car for a month and a half. I mean, what happened?
Not great.
Yeah, not great. And so clearly this helps the defense. And I don't want anything to help the defense in the case of Brian Kohlberger. Even though I wasn't there, I have my feelings on whether or not he did it based on what has been provided thus far.
And what we've talked about.
And what Jarrett has said. Yeah, of course. But no, that makes a lot of sense. So I just feel for the families. I'm sure they just want to be done with this trial.
And I know, I get that. I do. And we talked a little bit about that last time. There's just a disconnect between the prosecutors and the families in this case. It's very, very disappointing. You know, I lived through that myself on different occasions and had to repair those relationships. You're fighting for them. And if you're not together, if you're not informing them and they're I would tell families, like, do not go out onto the steps of this courthouse and be like, this isn't justice. You know, like, after you met with me and I'm telling you exactly what's going to happen and you support. It happened one time to me in my career.
Really?
And the lady just got like shocked in the lights of the camera and she couldn't believe what she said. And I said, like, you were good with what I did. Like, what happened?
Did you step in and kind of be
no,
like, no?
I wasn't physically there when I saw it on the news that night. I'm like, what the hell?
Did she call you after? Or
sadly, she was killed in her own right. She was murdered later. But
are you serious?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, it was terrible. But that has happened where there is that disconnect. They all need to get on the same page there. That's not a good situation. The other thing is they cannot have to do this trial twice. You can't do it prematurely. Imagine going through this trial, assuming Kohlberger's convicted. 2 years later saying Kohlberger didn't have all of this evidence, retrial. Now, Mr. Gonsalves, you're going through it again. And now you're re-traumatized. You're looking at these pictures. The media is back. It's all happening again. Nobody wants to go through this twice.
No, absolutely not. And just really quickly, because I just need to know, what did this woman feel like she didn't get justice for?
The suggestion was she didn't agree with the plea agreement that was reached. Like, they totally agreed with it. They said in open court
what did she allegedly do, or what did she get convicted of?
So in this case, it was her brother was murdered, and she had gone down and said to the news, like, this isn't justice. And I'm like, we just said in court it was justice. So,
and then she got murdered later. That's really sad.
Murdered. Yeah, very sad.
Oh my gosh. Do you know the case of, just speaking of having trials more than once, out of Knoxville, Tennessee, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom?
I have.
It's probably the worst case. It actually gives me nightmares, but just the point of this case, or what I'm about to say, is that it was so horrible. There was I think 4 or 5 suspects that killed this beautiful young couple in the most horrific way. Like, their last hours were the worst. People can Google it because I don't even want to say it. But this trial, the whole time, Shannon Christian's father just looked like he was ready to kill the perpetrators. And the ringleader ended up getting the death penalty. But what happened was the judge, they found him to be on oxys or something like that. And everybody except for the perp that got the death penalty, his name is Lamarcus Davidson, everybody else involved got new trials. And then they got lesser sentences after that.
And what happened to Davidson?
He's still on death row. I'm part of a Facebook group which says execute him now.
Well, let me say this. Yeah. So not knowing anything about the case, but having done death penalty cases and have been a part of death penalty appeals processes in the past, the level of scrutiny that Davidson's case will be reviewed with and continue to be reviewed with is really heightened, which means like electron microscopic analysis of what happened. So if it was good enough, the issues with the judge in that case were good enough to give 3 co-defendants new trials, yet this man's life hangs in the balance based on that trial, you can bet that death penalty could potentially be in jeopardy, or he would be ordered to get a new trial. I don't know how.
He's tried multiple times. I think this case was so horrific, and what he did was so terrible that they said he's good. He's done. He's tried many times.
So, and again, not knowing the facts, I mean, he may be dead to rights, pardon the pun, dead to rights, but he may be dead to rights. A lot of times the appeal standard is like, assuming this happened or that happened, would it have changed the outcome? And if the nature of the evidence is such that no, nothing would change the outcome because he stood on Fifth Avenue with a megaphone and admitted he did it and the DNA matched him. Again, so not knowing, I'm just saying the level of scrutiny, even in Kohlberger's case, for example, which is a death penalty case, is very high. So the standard, people would always say, oh, he'll lose on appeal. Like, how many times are we seeing appeals courts or where cases are routinely being overturned? Mm-hmm. It's happening. They're already looking in the Trump case to go up on appeal. Take this to the New York Court of Appeals, get it addressed by, folks that are just looking at the law. And what people don't understand necessarily about that is that's not a retrial. That is educated judges looking at legal argument, paperwork, not even watching the old trial, looking at legal standards, So appeals courts are important. And these reviews that they do are significant and could change things. So don't write it off.
Yeah, well, I don't want to really talk about Trump, but I do want to talk about my boy Hunter. So
he's your boy?
No, he's not my boy. That was sarcasm. Come on. Come on. Yes. Let's talk about Hunter. Let's talk about that trial, which is happening. Delaware, in Delaware.
It's a busy time for the true crime trial world. It's happening in
it really is.
Biden country, which is Delaware.
But, I mean, imagine that. Yeah.
Look, let's start with the premise. First, he was going to plead guilty to this. Okay. So I don't think anybody's under any delusion as to whether or not Hunter Biden committed this crime.
Yeah.
But what no one's talking about, and what I hope to achieve here, is to talk about things or a perspective that you haven't really heard. Why is that question on that form? The question Hunter Biden is alleged to have lied on, was whether or not he was addicted to drugs at the time he was securing that gun, okay? Why is that question there? Do you think we're just curious as to whether or not how many people are addicted to drugs in this country? The reality is that question is there because here's what happens when you put a gun in the hands of a drug addict. One of two things, okay? They pass out and drop it unsecured next to them. Somebody grabs it. A child gets it. Okay. What's really happening in this country is drug addicts buy drugs with guns. It's currency. So a gun falls into the hands of an addict who is so addicted, they will sell their mother-in-law to get cocaine, right? Or whatever they're addicted to.
Yeah.
Now you get what has more value on the street than a gun that's not personally tied to you, to a drug dealer. They're like, yo, man, I'll give you 2 weeks supply of your heroin, or in the case of Hunter Biden was crack cocaine.
I was about to say coke. Yeah.
Coke,
We've
right?
all seen the video.
So let me ask you this. That's why, and not even in Hunter's case, I'm saying generally why that question is there. It is to prevent. Now, who's going to honestly answer that question? I mean, come on. But it's to prevent those guns from getting in the hands of not only an addict who should not have a gun, but ultimately a drug dealer and having a gun out there. So that's why it's there. That's why it's not only about whether he lied, it's about what he lied about.
Right.
That's a problem. I mean, this is a big, the question is like, part of the issue with the Trump case was whether or not there was a crime. There's a crime here, okay, whether or not you buy or he did it or not. And then ask the question, why does this crime exist? And it exists to keep guns out of the hands of drug dealers. Right.
And what do you personally know, if anything, about the judge in this case?
About the judge in the Hunter case?
Yeah, I'm just curious.
So he was, I don't know much about the judge. They're federal. I do know this. The prosecutor was appointed by President Trump. However, it's Delaware, and those and it's believed that prosecutor wouldn't necessarily be unfavorable toward the Bidens. Where does that come down? I can't stand the fact that we're asking these questions in this country, which is, what president appointed this judge? How about the fact that you have a legal scholar who can use their own head to make a decision? Like everything we do is what person appointed this guy? Like, let me tell you something. If President Trump or President Biden ever appointed me to a judgeship, that would not factor into the decisions I make. I'm sorry. I just wouldn't. I try to make as much of I would have a bend legally. I would have an understanding of the law, and I'd make my decision. These guys don't talk on the phone. He's not going to call Biden and be like, hey, you appointed me to this job. What should I do? I understand that there's an assumption, there's a loyalty and all that, but we need to give people a little bit of a break and say not everything in your life is politics, and maybe you're going to actually do the right thing in your case.
Oh, that's so cute. Really?
Well,
I would not trust that as far as I could throw it, but that's just me.
Well, you know what? Having seen the way this is going, I just think everything is viewed through that political lens, and it's not the only thing. I think it factors into it, but there's a bigger picture here. So I don't assume much. So let's just say this. If you were just assuming what president appointed this prosecutor, you would say, oh boy, this is a President Trump appointee. The Bidens are in trouble. But if you dig a little deeper, this is a person who has had, I would say, the support or some kind of I wouldn't even say the word relationship, but a professional relationship with the Bidens. So
yeah, I'm not saying anything that I think that he's going to side not with Hunter because Trump appointed him. I'm just saying in general, I think that people, and not people necessarily like you who are obviously very experienced, or people like me who are trial junkies. I think people need to pay attention when they're looking at people's constitutional rights. Like, I don't want to bring up Trump, but, you know, with Trump, it's like, really, if that was your dad, do you think that's fair to have this trial in a liberal state with a biased judge where the jury looks to the biased judge? I'm not saying one thing or another. I'm just saying, take a look at that and picture that being your dad or somebody.
Certainly if it was my dad, I'd feel totally different about it. But the reality is, I've always said this, state prosecutors, okay, and we're in New York City today. We're in Manhattan, right? State prosecutors are in the rape, robbery, murder, and drug dealing business, okay, and sexual assault business. When you venture out of that world and you're in election law business and all this stuff, you got to start saying, like, what are we doing here, right? To me, that was always the question I was asking. You know, like, why? Why are we bringing this case now? I mean, and look, let our commenters and viewers fill in the blanks. I don't care to get into a political discussion.
No, I definitely don't. Oh,
look,
my gosh.
Come on. That's like, I mean, obviously, that's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
You know, are we trying to eradicate the world of people who book election contributions incorrectly?
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
No, seriously. And look, I just don't feel like talking about politics because, I mean, I upset people every day with something I say, so I don't want to go deeper into that.
Here's the thing, Lauren. If you cannot argue the fact that even on both sides, there has been a weaponization of politics and prosecution in this country. That's a fact. Wherever you come down now, the minute you say that, because President Trump was convicted last week, I'm anti that conviction. Hunter, let's stop for 1 second. Let me say this. A former president was tried and convicted last week. This week, the president's son is on trial. What the hell is going on in this country? Like, it's like a reality show.
Yeah.
It's through the court system. All of a sudden, lawyer world and trial world and political world are all coming together in this hot alphabet soup.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
No, you're right.
None of this is good. Whatever side of the fence you're on, this is insane.
Yeah, when you actually put it out there like that, it is totally
insane. Think about it. Now we're watching Hunter Biden get marched in, and then President Biden's wishing his son well, and the First Lady is in the federal courtroom for federal laws that he pushed.
Yeah, it's so odd, and yeah, when you put it that way, it's mind-blowing.
Why are people cynical about who's appointing the prosecutors? I can't imagine.
I know. Well, you know what? Let's step out of this country. Let's go to Italy to yesterday to Amanda Knox, Foxy Knoxy. So Foxy Knoxy, she was convicted of slander. She was hoping to put all of this behind her since her 2011 exoneration, and that just wasn't the case. As to what we saw yesterday, she really wanted to clear her name. Now, she doesn't have to serve jail time because time served for, I think she served 4 years or something like that.
So she was given credit for her time in on the homicide for the defamation and slander case, yes. But that's not, she's still upset. I mean, she didn't get a pass here. She is now a convict. She's a convict. She's now a married mother of 2. I give her credit for going back to that courtroom. I cannot imagine the PTSD she had. She's something. Amanda Knox is something. And again, so we're talking about 2 different issues, though. If you look at the killing itself, she was acquitted. Okay. But the issue before the Italian court now, and she expected this to go her way, was whether or not she threw the bar owner under the bus, okay, which she did, okay, and she had, in her mind, valid reasons. She was being interrogated. She was in her mental faculties.
Under intense police scrutiny, she said. Yeah.
Right. But again, and you've heard false confessions in the past when you're in that situation. Do people then make up entire different scenarios and put the blame on someone else? That's a little, as my little girl says, sus. Right? So is that still a thing? She'll tell me that's out of style too. Like that was a 5th grade word. We're in 6th grade.
No, it's a thing. It's a thing.
I think, look, like we're still talking about Amanda Knox. We're still talking about like some of these cases that have been going on for years and years and back in a courtroom. It's like they have a second and third life. The Menendez brothers are back in the news on things. It's like this stuff never goes away, which is why you don't want to rush into a Koberger trial, which is why you don't want to prematurely move on a case, because these things will come back to bite you.
Yeah, no, I could totally see that. And with Amanda Knox, I look back at her case and I thought she was not a favorable defendant. I definitely thought that she had some weird, quirky mannerisms.
Absolutely.
She kind of bothered me throughout all that. And so I didn't pay much attention, I guess, at the time to the facts, to the evidence. I just kind of looked at her and I was like, I'm sure she's probably guilty. Look at her. Look at her demeanor, her body language. And I feel guilty about that. I really do.
Well, look at Karen Reed's body language.
Yeah.
Like, so these, again, you just can't paint people with a broad brush. I've had people, I had a case where there was a shooting in a bar and this guy, every chance he get, he was like, I didn't do this. He's screaming at the cameras and this and that. I'm like, that's how an innocent guy acts. Like, I'd be doing that. Like, I didn't kill it every single time I saw something. Like, wait a minute. And the guy was acquitted. Wow. But so, like, you just never know how people are going to act.
Yeah.
You cannot apply, I always say this too, and it's true, you cannot apply logic to an illogical situation. Amanda Knox was a baby. She's in a foreign country. She's part of what was a violent killing. She's in close proximity to it. She's now accused of killing. So you can imagine what's going on. Does she shut down to a point where something else takes over in her mentally? Who knows?
Wait, remember they told her she had HIV too? They tortured her. They really did.
It was nuts.
I can't get over that. And it's just funny. You bring up Karen Reed. I think this is the only murder trial I've seen where the defendant and her lawyers pose for pictures outside.
Oh, yeah, and have their own press conferences.
Yeah, top and bottom teeth showing.
I don't know.
I was like, oh boy.
There's no doubt that's a wild one. I know you love that one. It's a wild one.
Gosh, I mean, I'm fascinated, and I wish that it was over, because it's literally playing in the background all day and I'm having a very hard time
think
focusing.
About it. It's cops, it's corruption, it's everything. You know, they're generally attractive young people. They were partying. There's a mystery.
Officer O'Keefe was so handsome.
It's got everything.
It's so sad. Oh my gosh. Well, let's close this out with, I want to talk about BRITTANEE DREXEL, because I recently watched a Dateline, I believe, in a 2020, and I saw you. Because you were the Drexel family attorney.
Yes.
And this is a case, and if you're not familiar with this is almost like, I think I told my husband, was God playing a joke? I mean, it's so tragic. This girl wants to go to spring break in Myrtle Beach, and her mom says, no, it's too dangerous. You're too young. I don't want anything to happen to you. She sneaks off and she goes, and look what happens. She winds up, unfortunately, raped and murdered by someone.
Kidnapped, raped, and murdered.
There you go. In the most terrifying death you could ever imagine.
Totally random, picked up off the street, and then her body is missing for all those years. And her mom, Don Drexel is my client, my friend, just an inspiration, fought like hell to keep fighting for answers. And you want to talk about, like, I look at the Gonsalves family, and this was a national case. The Drexel case was huge. And Dawn kept fighting for BRITTANEE, kept fighting for her family, kept fighting for answers, was told at one point that her daughter was was raped, shot, and fed to alligators.
That was the worst.
Turned out to be all bullshit.
How long did she have to live with that info?
13 years. Oh, that particular info? Several years. several years till things changed. A new team came in, a new FBI team came in, some new investigators down there. I came in on Dawn's behalf. Everybody got on the same page. We started working together, and this team of investigators were tremendous. I mean, my job, she was so jaded at that point, was to kind of translate for her and to rebuild the credibility, provided I found it in these officers, which I did. Really was just to be there and advocate for her, ask the questions that Dawn had. Not that she couldn't do them on her own. But again, I have been down this road before. I mean, I've been fighting for moms of murdered children my entire career because I was raised by a tough mom. And it's just kind of my thing. And to have been given the opportunity to fight for Dawn, and I knew about the Drexel case long before I met Dawn. It was really an honor, one of the greatest honors of my career, and things continue to come out. So stay tuned in South Carolina. It ain't over yet. Oh my gosh.
I mean, I want to say, I just feel like Angel Voss, Ray Moody's girlfriend, Ray Moody was convicted of raping, kidnapping, and killing Brittany. I'm kind of pissed that she just gets it, because whatever the story they told, Angel didn't know that. Of course she did.
Yeah. Stay tuned and stay tuned. And I can't get too deep into that one, other than to say I was there when Dawn first laid eyes on Raymond Moody in that courtroom, and I've seen some crazy shit in my career. It was intense. It was the moment she was waiting for, and it was incredible to have been down there and be there in that moment when Ray Moody, shackled, came in and admitted what he did to Brittany Drexel. And more information is coming, so stay tuned.
But he also victim blamed. He lied, and I don't know if he elaborated on that or backpedaled a little bit. But I want to make it clear: Brittany disappeared in 2009.
Yes.
Don Drexel, you guys didn't get to face him until 2022. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that's a long freaking time.
13 years.
Yeah, and his explanation was like, yeah, she saw smoking weed. Well, Brittany did not like weed. Everybody knew that, right?
Right.
She hopped in the car with strangers and was like, yeah, let me have a hit.
So it was a self-serving statement, no doubt. And people do that. Killers do that. It's weird. They lie about small things. But here's the thing. Dawn needed the following answers. Number one, Brittany's body was missing for 13 years. So Moody led the investigators to her body. I went to that site. I was there. And you know, they talk about pheromones and emotion that lays in the air. You can feel her there. I was there with the FBI and all the investigators and Dawn and her family. We were there on the dirt where she was buried, and we joined hands. And there was a news crew with us too, a national news crew, and the cameras were off at this point, and we prayed. It was really amazing. I'm gonna cry. Yeah, I mean, it was really an amazing thing. But so Moody,
so nice. Oh my God.
Moody's story led to, and actually Don gave me a locket. But Don gave me a locket with Brittany's ashes, and I have them whenever I have a tough case coming up or something going on. I keep that locket in my pocket.
And I remember that I'm such a loser. I remember Dawn saying that.
Yeah.
I think she was asked if they were going to bury Brittany, and she's like, "No, she's been buried for literally 10 years.
Right.
We're done burying her."
Right.
And so they had her cremated, and everybody wore a locket.
Right.
That's so nice that she gave that to you.
And spent so much time, and people spent a hell of a lot more time than I did looking for her. But Moody's lies, at least Dawn got that closure. Got to remember Brittany. I was there in Rochester when she was remembered at her celebration of her life. We were up there. And then, so there was that closure. Moody is behind bars for the rest of his life. There's that closure. Will we ever know every detail? No. But you have to find solace in the fact what you do know and the big stuff we got there. And look, whatever Ray Moody wants to lie about, he could keep lying from his jail cell for the rest of his life.
I guess, but you know, you put Angel Voss around a man like that again, and she, in my opinion, allegedly, she could do something similar with luring a victim. And the last thing I want to say about Ray Moody, and I think I texted you this when I was watching it, is that, you know, I really do want to study human behavior more, and I'm fascinated by it. And he almost got me for a minute when he was crying, like for a split second.
He should have never, ever been out of jail from California for what he did.
Right.
But multiple children kidnappings.
Yes.
But I always say this. Let me say this about the two people involved in this case. I've done a lot of drive-by shootings, and I always say you don't have the shooting without the drive-by. The driver is as responsible as the shooter. Remember that and stay tuned.
Ooh, I love that. Okay, I just got chills. Okay, everyone, if you like this show, shoot me a note. We're going to do a few more, like I said, before we roll it out. If you don't like the show,
shoot me a note.
No, you can shoot us both a note either way. I have all of our information in the episode notes. And yeah, like I said, there's going to be more of Lauren and Jarrett. So stay tuned.